Lottie Curated, daughter of a Laguna Pueblo chief, was photographed around 1905. She wears the kawaii attire with belt and necklaces, a marker of ritual roles. The scene takes place in west-central New Mexico near Albuquerque, when railroad expansion linked indigenous settlements to markets and photographers, altering circuits of exchange and representation. 1908 photograph attributed to Roland Reed portrays an Ojibwa woman. At the turn of the 20th century, Ojibwa groups occupied the Great Lakes region, with seasonal cycles of fishing and gathering, and the production of birch bark and bead art. The image suggests cultural continuity in the face of technical modernity. Subscribe and comment where you're watching us from. Carl Wertz's photograph, made in 1900 in Arizona, records two young Hopi beside a window. The rolled hairstyle, typical of unmarried women, marks age and roles in the social cycle. At the turn of the century, the villages on the mesas of the Colorado Plateau received artists, traders, and tourists. The portrayed women's gazes track the approach of this new circuit. Image from 1878 at Fort Keogh, Montana Territory, Cheyenne woman. The fort, created after the defeat at Little Bighorn, 1876, and part of Nelson A. Miles's operations, consolidated the Army's presence on the plains. The Cheyenne, an Algonquian people allied with the Lakota and Arapaho, were being displaced to reservations and negotiating the preservation of rights and leadership. The scene records Carlota Chiwiwi and her daughters Maria and Felicita Tura, women of Isleta Pueblo. Produced in the early 20th century and attributed to Poli, it is set in the Southwest, when New Mexico was shifting from territory to statehood, 1912. The framing underscores kin ties and women's roles in Tiwa social organization, in ritual and economic tasks. Photograph of young Hopi from Sichomovi, First Mesa, Arizona, recorded by Frederick Monson in the first decades of the 20th century. The girls wear ceremonial garments associated with the agricultural calendar and community rituals. The scene is set in a Southwest in transformation, in which worship practices and village organization remain active. In 1895, a young woman of Taos Pueblo in present-day New Mexico is seen among adobe walls and patios. In the background, hornos and tools indicate food preparation and maintenance of dwellings. The Tiwa-speaking settlement has occupied the upper Rio Grande for centuries, a point of exchange since the pre-colonial period. Its multi-story houses of wood and adobe express communal organization. In the 1892 image, a young Kiowa woman is seen in everyday activity in the community space. The clothing, with applied beadwork, trade fabrics, and adapted cuts, evidences the circulation of goods on the plains and contact with settlers. The composed gaze and the adornments mark phases of youth and participation in rites that structured Kiowa life at the end of the 19th century. In the 1897 photograph made by Frank LaRoche, a Spokane woman appears. Her clothing in hide and cloth, necklaces and beads, and the basketry point to Columbia Plateau techniques. The scene records the convergence between tradition and transformation in the Pacific Northwest, railroad expansion, fur and timber markets, and the persistence of community rituals. A 1904 photograph in present-day New Mexico records the Corn Maiden, a mythical figure of the Pueblo peoples. In the transition to the 20th century, the scene highlights corn as the basis of the diet, a regulator of the agricultural calendar, and an offering in ceremonies. The framing reveals the link between myth, labor, household economy, and community life in the Southwest. In 1900, photographer Carl Everton Moon began a systematic record of Native American peoples. He traveled through homelands to document dwellings, clothing, rituals, and landscapes. He sought to preserve evidence of ways of life in transformation in the face of Western expansion, new frontiers, and federal policies at the turn of the 20th century. Woman of the Taos Pueblo people, photographed in the 1880s, when New Mexico was a U.S. territory. The image records dark wool in the garment, a shawl over the shoulders, turquoise necklaces, and a traditional hairstyle. In the background, adobe evidences communal organization. The expression evokes a daily life guided by rituals, local exchanges, and seasonal agricultural cycles. In the 1880s, Marcia Pascal, a woman of Cherokee descent and daughter of U.S. Army officer George Pascal, moved between military posts and Indian Territory. Her experience fits into the post-Civil War period, when westward expansion, railroads, and legal reforms redefined jurisdictions, the economy, and social relations in mixed communities. In 1894, a Kiowa woman of the Southern Plains people lives in Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma. After the Plains Wars and the fixing of borders, her community faces economic and religious changes. Commerce and labor shift, ceremonies are restricted, the language loses ground, family roles are redefined, formally supported by intertribal alliances. Year 1900, United States. A young indigenous woman appears in the ceremonial dress of her nation, in a ritual or portrait. The scene marks the passage into the 20th century, when Native peoples suffered land losses, assimilation policies, and legal restrictions. The attire and adornments reaffirm collective bonds and cultural continuity in the face of federal reforms. A photographic record from 1899 by Frank Reinhardt portrays Hattie Tom, an Apache woman. The image belongs to the late 19th century, when the North American West was undergoing political and territorial reorganizations and indigenous leaders were negotiating new civil regimes. The framing and the adornments reveal cultural choices and strategies of public self-presentation. Elsie Vance Chestuan, associated with the Chiricahua, is situated in Apache history of the Southwest at the end of the 19th century. Amid military campaigns and successive removals, clans maintained kin networks, alliances, and routes of exchange. Her name holds memories of captivity, forced transfers, and contacts with military posts on the Mexico-United States border. In the 1886 photo, Lizzie Longwolf is part of Buffalo Bill's show, on the Wild West tours that popularized a version of the frontier. Her presence illustrates the logic of the acts. Timed rides, precision shooting, and choreographed reenactments combined to present the public with a commercial narrative of the West and its indigenous protagonists. Produced in 1895, the image records a young Hopi woman, a Pueblo people established on the mesas of northern Arizona. The haircut, the woven blanket, and the ornaments point to lineage and a stage of initiation. At the turn of the 19th century, contacts with railways, traders, and anthropologists intensified, while seasonal rituals continued to organize community life. In 1899, Frank Reinhardt recorded in studio Hattie Tom, a Chiricahua Apache woman. The portrait, tied to the ethnographic campaigns of the late 19th century, documents adornments, hairstyle, and fabrics that indicate making techniques and affiliations. The composition and controlled light highlight trajectories marked by removals, negotiations, and alliances after the Apache Wars. An 1886 photograph shows Isabel Perico Njadi, a Chiricahua Apache held as a prisoner of war. The record is situated at the close of the campaigns in the U.S. Southwest. The surrender of Geronimo led to the capture of Apache groups and the deportation of families. Her presence highlights the effects of military advance and territorial occupation on indigenous peoples. Dated circa 1900, the photograph portrays Alice, possibly linked to the Cayuse, Walla Walla, or Umatilla peoples of the Columbia Plateau. Features, dress, and ornaments indicate this affiliation. The context involved federal treaties, removals to reservations, land loss, missionary oversight, and the redefinition of authorities in the Pacific Northwest. Dated 1885, the photograph records a young Comanche woman. Hairstyle, beads, and cloth reveal distinctive craft techniques and the circulation of goods through trade networks on the southern Great Plains. The period follows the collapse of bison herds and the imposition of reservations under federal oversight, a process that redefined the group's mobility, dress, and modes of subsistence. Dated 1900, the photograph records a young Hopi woman on her wedding day. The setting is that of the villages on the Arizona Plateau, where rites united families and clans. Cotton textiles and wool blankets with shell and turquoise adornments indicate inherited crafts. The ceremonial hairstyle and the textiles offered mark the transition to adult life and community continuity. In the 1886 photograph, Julie Nelson appears wearing attire consistent with the social codes of the late 19th century. The structured dress, pinned-up hair, and erect posture indicate a pursuit of respectability in a context of urbanization and expanding industry. The fixed gaze and calculated pose reveal control of her own body before the camera of the time. In 1895, George A. Addison paints Amy and Carrie Kiowa, with two figures on Kiowa Island off the South Carolina coast. In the post-Reconstruction era, when the barrier islands combined fishing, cotton cultivation, and small ports, the canvas records clothing, gestures, and utensils, situating daily work under the rhythm of the tides and coastal circuits of exchange. In the 1880s, young Comanches were central to collective life. They prepared food, set up and moved camps, tanned hides, and organized exchanges, sustaining networks linked to buffalo hunting and trade. They transmitted languages, songs, and rituals, weaving kinship and alliances and preserving cultural continuities amid changes on the plains.